Welcome back to our Learning Google Apps Script for HR series brought to you by Prairie-HR-Solutions, where we believe knowledge is to be shared and in empowering HR professionals to really rethink how we are providing our people solutions and services with tools we probably already have. As always, if you find our content useful, please hit that subscribe button and we can continue bringing you HR related solutions and content. My name is Jake Finger, Principal Consultant here at Prairie-HR-Solutions. And today I would like to pick up where we left off with that last video. In the last video, we learned what Google Apps Script is and had it connect to our Google Sheet, which we're on right now. Now we can start building our actual project step by step. What we are building is a way to interact with an employee database in the form of a spreadsheet. And we want to be able to interact with it through a toolbar of sorts over here on the side, somewhere right here, we'll probably put it. And what we want to do is we want to pull individual employee data, either by name or by job title, or in this case, salary. And then we would also like to do something with that data. So if we were pulling salary, we would like to pull all the salary into this. And then on the back end, do some calculations, maybe find the average or conduct a quick salary analysis to figure out what to pay a new employee, and then have that result populate over here in our UI to where we're not seeing all these numbers, we're just seeing the end result. And then we would also like to add employees as well, say we have a new hire coming on, or delete a terminating employee from the record. So let's work on that next step and pull more data than just one cell over to our Google Apps Script. And when we pull data in a multiple amount of cells here, say we're pulling all of this data, it's going to come in the form of an array. So a quick recap of where we are and where we left off is we created this function called get sheet data. And in that function, we created a variable called SS. And what this SS variable does is it declares to Google Apps Script that we are using the Google Sheet application. And in that application, we are wanting to get the active spreadsheet that this script is bound to. And then we created another variable or declared another variable called sheet. And what sheet does is it uses that SS variable and gets a sheet by name. And that name of that sheet is employee data. And employee data is the name of the tab or the sheet. And then from there, we declared our employee data variable, which uses that sheet variable. And in that sheet, it gets the range of the second row and the second column, and then it gets the value of that range. And then what we did is we logged that out, that variable employee data out, which is the cell value of row 2, column 2. So if we run this, it will give us the value of that cell, which is developer. And if we go back to our sheet, you'll see that row 2, column 2 is in fact developer. Now, if you have no idea what I'm talking about here, please go back and watch the initial video, which shows us how we built this and what it's actually doing, as well as authorizing. Now, let's go back to our app script here. I used a terminology a second ago called an array. And what an array is it's a list or a collection of values that are stored in a single variable. And what that allows us to do is it allows us to work with multiple related items, like a group of numbers, strings, objects, or categories all at once. Let's look at an example to illustrate what it is that I mean. So I had a conversation a little while ago about lemon cars. So let's create a variable, an array of cars that have historically been deemed lemons. If you go to a used car lot today and you find one of these cars, chances are it's probably a lemon. So what we'll do is we'll declare a variable, let lemon cars equal to, so since we're creating an array is not in parentheses. An array is in square brackets. Everything within square brackets of an array is what we call an element. It could be considered as an item. I prefer to use the term element. So each one of these elements, or in our case, cars, is in a string format. So because they're strings, we are going to need quotation marks. So our first lemon car is a Fiero. Each element is separated by a comma. Our second one is the untrusty Volkswagen Rabbit. And then we'll do DeLorean. And what list of lemon cars would be complete without the Pinto? And then we end that line with a semicolon. Now let's log our lemon car variable and see what we come up with. So now if we run this, it's going to produce a simple array, just as we had it. Now, say we don't want all of these, but we just want to pull out one element. Say we want to pull out rabbit. Now, the way a array works is it's not intuitively starting at one. Each one of these, like Fiero, rabbit, each one of these elements is an index of this entire array. So when we look at the entire array, it doesn't start at index 1. Fiero is not index 1. Fiero is actually index 0. Rabbit is at index 1. DeLorean is at index 2. So to pull a specific index from an array, in our case, we're going to log it. What we will need to do is log that individual index position for that variable. So to do that, since it's an array, we use square brackets, and then we put inside those square brackets the actual array index. So if we wanted rabbit, we would hit 1. And if we ran it, it would go through that array and pull out the index at position 1, which is rabbit. So if we wanted, say, Pinto, it would be 0, 1, 2, 3. 3, and then we'd run it, and then it would log out Pinto. So this is a great way to pull data in a one-dimensional array. Oftentimes we'll find out, though, that as we're pulling a set of cells in a range and pulling all the values of that range, we will not get a simple one-dimensional array like this. We will get what's called a two-dimensional array. And let's illustrate that. So what we can do is let's comment this out. I'll talk about comments real quick. So what commenting does is it allows you to write yourself notes or essentially deactivate a line of code. And we do that by commenting it out by putting these 2 forward slashes in front of the line. So these 2 forward slashes essentially tells Google Apps Script to ignore that this is not runnable code. It is just a note or a comment. So as we're writing code, we can leave ourselves comment like, oh, we need to change this, or we can use comments to describe what codes do. And once we put together our code, our source code snippets, we will add comments in there describing what each line of code or each grouping of code does. And it's just a good practice because as you're learning code, you'll find that you'll reuse code snippets quite a bit. And it's easier to know what those code snippets do, so you can just easily go in there and grab it. So now if we run this, it's going to skip over this employee data variable. And what we're going to trip is an error. And that error is going to come from this because according to Google Apps Script, this employee data doesn't exist because it's been commented out. So let's run this and I'll show you what I mean. Yep, reference error, employee data is not defined. And that's at code line 7. So good. So let's create a new employee data variable. And instead of calling just one cell, let's call this entire range. So instead of calling row 2 column 2, what we want to do is get all of this. And to do that, we have to give it a starting and a stopping point. So in our case, it's going to start at row 2, column 1. And then we want to end at 1, 2, 3 rows, 1, 2, 3 columns. So how we can tell AppScript to do that is by going to the sheet, getting the range, and this time we want it to start at row 2, column 1, adding an additional column, and then it'll tell us how many rows we want to go down, which we decided 3, and how many columns we wanted to go over, which was 3. Now we also wanted to get value, and you'll remember that you have value or values. In our case, we have multiple cells, which is plural, so we want to get the values of those cells. And now when we log this, after we end it with a semicolon, now once we log this, it's going to not just give us a single value, but all the values of those cells in a form of an array, but it will look a little differently. So let's run this and I'll show you what I mean. Get values is not a function. And that the reason why we tripped an error here is because what I did was I typed VAL or VAUES and it should be VALUES. Now we run this and it'll run, and you'll see that in our execution log, it gives us an array, but it gives us an array inside of an array. We have square brackets starting it, and then we have an array separated by a comma, and then another array separated by a comma, and then another array separated by a comma. So let's go back to our sheet and see what we're actually doing. So as it's getting these values, what it will do is it will create an array of this entire set. And then inside that array, it'll create another array of the row. And then each element is a column inside that row. And then the next array is the next row. And then each element inside that row is, or that array is a corresponding column. So when we go back here and look at our log again, you can see that that is exactly what's occurring. This is the first row, or the second row with the data in it that we pulled. And each one of these is a column. So to get this data now, let me run this and I'll put this up here so we can see it. So let me copy that. I'll create another comment. So this is what we're actually pulling. Now to get data from an array of an arrays, we can simply do the same method as we did down here in get cars, except we need to do various levels. So to get to, say, Joan, this array, if we want to just pull the name Joan, we need to go to the first level index, which is 0, And then if we just run this, what we'll do is you will see that it will pull that index at 0. Now, to drill down further to get to Joan, what we need to do is go to 0 as well. So what we can do is just add another square box and go 0. And then when we run this, it will pull Joan. And then to get to the developer, we would go 0, 1, run it, and you'll see developer. And then we'll do one more here. If we wanted to get Joe's salary, what we would do is drill down one level, 0, 1. 1 would be Joe. And then we wanted his salary, so 1 or 0, 1, 2, and 2, and run. And then that's the salary. So we could still get the data in a multi-dimensional array or two-dimensional array by using the same thing. But as you can see, if we start taking individual salaries or individual job titles to put into our UI, each specific cell, it's going to get very confusing very quickly. We have to remember not only what index is of the first level, but then drilling down the other indexes. So this can get pretty cumbersome. What we can do is make this a little bit more manageable. We could make this into a one-dimensional array, just like this, we could do it a couple different ways. What we could do is we could do what's called a dot flat method. And what the flat method does is it just collapses it down a level. So if we run this employee data, we took off the square brackets because we're not really drilling into it. We just want to see what dot flat does. So if we run that, it gives us a one-dimensional array, which is helpful, except if we wanted to run a salary analysis, we would need to get every single salary from this array. And that's not incredibly helpful because we can't actually separate. Let's say we wanted to pull a salary, and that salary we would do 2. So if we did 2, all it would do was pull the very first one. So we would still need Joe and Pat's salary. Unfortunately, we can't actually comma and then do another one because that just doesn't work. It just pulls the first one. So in order to get the other ones, we would have to create a separate variable going to that index. So that's not really that helpful if we're going to do something with all those salaries and populate or do a calculation on, say, the average salary or conduct a salary analysis to find a new employee's pay rate, whatnot. But it is helpful if we just want to collapse the entire thing down and if we're just going to use the individual elements for whatever purpose. So there's flat. What we really want to do essentially is transform the two-dimensional array and create a new array with only the values of the salary. Now, to do that, what we're wanting Google Apps Scripts to do is to go through this two-dimensional array and go through each one of these arrays and grab the element at the index 2, the second index, and then store each one of them in a new array. And to do that, we do what's called the map method. And what the map method does is just what we're wanting it to do. It's going to go through and it's going to pull out whatever index number it is that we talk about and store it in a completely new array. So let's create that. Let's log these out first. And let's create that variable. Let's pull out all the salaries. So let's go let salaries equal to, since we're going to use the employee data, we want to call it employee data. And then what we want to do is we want to map method it. Now, map method takes a callback function. Since it's a method, we need to have the parentheses. And you'll see that it is a callback function that takes certain values, certain arguments. So we'll need the function. And then it's going to take an argument. And what we're trying to do is get the inner array. So we can just call the argument inner array. And then a function takes the curly brackets. Now, I know this is probably getting pretty confusing, and it is confusing the very first couple of times you do it. A great idea is to save code snippets, as I was mentioning earlier, so you can go back and reuse that snippet without having to drill down and think too hard about, okay, what is it that I'm doing, or having to watch videos or whatnot. You already have the code there. You just need to change things like the referenced variable or whatnot. So inside this callback function, what we are wanting to return is the second index of that inner array. So now if we log this variable that we just called and then run it, you'll notice that it went through, created a new array of all elements at the second index and gave us our salaries. Now, looking at this variable, without really understanding everything that's going on, like the map function takes a callback function, which takes the argument, and then from that argument, it's going to return the second position index of every single one of them. So we could use it this way and just keep reusing it if you ever need to do this. But there's another method that we can use, another way of doing this that makes it a little bit easier on the eyes to actually read. So let's go ahead and create another variable. Let me type it correctly. And what we'll do is we'll call this salaries 2. And salary 2 is going to take the two-dimensional array, employee data, and we're going to map that. But instead of using a function, what we're going to do is writing a function out the way that we just did is we're going to do an arrow function. So what an arrow function is we start by saying, okay, we're going to use the argument of the inner array. And this could be anything we want. I mean, we can call it anything. We just have to make sure it's consistent. And instead of writing function and then putting the argument in that function and then using the curly brackets, what we can do is called an arrow function, which is an equal sign and then a greater than. It looks like a little alligator mouth trying to eat the equal sign. And what that's telling Google Apps Script is that it's a callback function, and this is the argument. And what we're wanting to return is the inner array argument at the second index position. So now if we log this, and then, oops, let me make sure it's spelled right, or we're going to throw an error. If we log this now, you'll notice that it provides us the same exact thing. And if we say we wanted to not get the salaries, but perhaps we wanted to get all the job titles in our organization here, what would we pick? Instead of 2, we would pick 1. So if we change this to 1, and we'll change this one up here to 1, 2, so that they run the same thing. you'll see that it is the job titles. So now what we can do is, instead of having to create a variable for every single salary, we now have the salaries stored in its own variable. So now when we want to do like an average, we just do an average on one variable, and then we populate the result wherever we need to populate it. So I want to end here for this segment, because what we're going to do next segment is we are going to really get into developing our UI. We're going to pause from this now that we got the data we needed, and we're going to create our user interface over here through HTML. Now, I'm not going to get into HTML. If you'd like me to do a separate video on HTML, just send me an email or a text or something, and I'll be more than happy to do so. But we're going to create our user interface template here, so when we start creating more data, we can see it populate over here. So until next time, I hope you all take care. And again, if you like what we're providing to you, please hit that subscribe button so we can continue to create more and more content. And if you have ideas for content, please shoot us an email. We have our Prairie-HR-Solutions website linked down in our description. And until next time, take care.